It is my pleasure to introduce Ginny Pannabecker. I don't know if I pronounced that right. Sorry, Ginny. Hopefully close. Ginny is Assistant Dean and Director for Research Collaboration and Engagement with the University Libraries at Virginia Tech. The RCE team provides a variety of cross-location and distance research services for the Virginia Tech community and manages 3 health sciences library locations. Please join me in welcoming Ginny. And Ginny, go ahead and feel free to take it away. Share your slides if you have any, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to tell us. I think you're still muted. Yeah, still have you muted. Let me
I apologize.
Oh, there you go.
Unmute issue. Are you all seeing the title slide okay?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you all so much for joining. I'm thrilled to see you all here. And joining me for prompting best practices, thinking about how libraries or their home institutions, generally mostly home institutions, more broadly than the libraries specifically, are creating, sharing, applying, and adapting Gen AI policies. So thank you for the introduction, Jason. And I do have a couple links here that I'm going to add one in the chat to start with. This is a folder for the presentation, and it should have view access for anybody. If you have access to Google, I do understand that sometimes institutions may not have access. If that's the case, then I'll be showing it here, and then when we have some group conversation, hopefully at least one person in each group will have access to look at this. So just a brief agenda, which we're already, oh, I apologize, I'm off on the timing there. Just consider it 15 minutes later than all of this. I just realized. We'll talk, I'll provide just kind of a brief review of some select policies. These are just examples. There are so many out there. On Gen AI and teaching, learning, and research. And then we'll have an opportunity to break into groups and take a look at one of these policies or one that you have from your institution that you'd like to look at or that others share, and think about what your thoughts are on what's included in these, what questions you have, is there something missing? How would you apply these, or how are you applying them in your area? And then identify someone in your group to record notes. There will be a notes document for each group. And just discuss these policies. We'll finish up with some brief 1 to 2 minute report backs from each group, just a couple highlights, and then we'll wrap up. And you have that folder, so you'll have access to the notes we all take together. And a note on language, I'm using policy here, including things like guidance, guidelines, principles. So to start out with, what do you all feel is important to include in policies on using Gen AI in teaching, learning, or research? If you have just a couple thoughts, we put them in chat and I'll read out a few. Right, so limitations, how much is too much? AI literacy, ethical use, security and privacy, data and privacy, more security and privacy. It's definitely a big concern. What's the line not to cross? Misconduct, understanding the bias, confidentiality, question mark? Academic integrity, encouraged to use it, barriers of access or cost, critical thinking. It's awesome. Thank you all so much. Please keep adding these. And I'm seeing support for using AI, Gen AI to support creative activities and scholarship, but not replace human critical thinking and scholarship. Thank you so much. I have some general resources that have some links. Each of those images is linked to the specific web page or policy document that it shows. And then on the side, there's just some collections of AI policies kind of writ large, which include policies around education at national or international levels, as well as more granular areas. The OECD AI Policy Observatory, you can look at what policies might be available from different countries, for example. But 4 that I pulled out here as general resources to highlight, and I am coming from I'll say an academic libraries, research libraries, university libraries perspective. So if you're in a public library, then I'm very interested to hear what you're seeing as well in your institutions or broader like organizations. But here we have a few examples from UNESCO Guidance for Generative AI in Education and Research from the Association of Research Libraries. The ARL, this is very brief. It's just a 2-page principles for AI in research libraries. IFLA, the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, has a working group and provides some kind of overall introduction, guidance, examples, and resources. And then there's also OECD Policy Observatory and overview. They have an AI principles overview as well. So I linked to that. And you'll hopefully be happy to hear, or perhaps interested to hear, you may have seen this already, that many of the things you brought up in chat are shown in the different policies that I looked at. So I did, there's a very brief spreadsheet of 5 examples from Virginia Tech, since that's where I'm based, from University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, University of British Columbia in Canada, University of New Mexico in the United States, to get an institution in the West versus the East, and also the National Autonomous University of Mexico. So I just went through and linked to a few policies from different institutions so you can kind of take a look around. But I'm sure you all have others you would add. And in reviewing some of these, many of the institutions have multiple policies. Generally speaking, they tend to include these components, an overall introduction to AI and Gen AI, why it matters in their context, what the institutional approach is, like kind of how, and that kind of seems to vary some based on like how much risk is front-loaded versus promoting exploration or experimentation. Those are kind of different in tone as you look across policies. They provide specific guidelines. All of them that I've seen talk about limitations, including accuracy, transparency, intellectual property. data privacy and security is a big focus, both for teaching, but also for research, emphasizing that sharing data in a publicly available AI tool may be tantamount to sharing that data publicly. So to be very cautious and thinking about how what kind of tools, what kind of level of access there is to that data when you enter it, if you do. And various other guidance for practices, along with examples, resources, and training. Some policies also highlighted social and environmental impacts or accessibility in particular. So I wanted to give us time to be able to dig into these a little in groups, and I do have a link here. It's within that folder. This is a subfolder. Oh yeah, and thank you. I'm looking at the chat now and I missed that last one, HIPAA violations. That definitely came up in a lot of the research policies. And you know, some institutions that I listed, such as the University of New Mexico, are just starting to develop their policies and may just mostly be linking out to resources as they kind of pull people together to decide what they're going to do. So hopefully that spreadsheet gives you a variety, and you all can also share things you've found. But here's the subfolder with group notes documents. And each document will have these instructions as well, but I'd love it if once we break into groups, and assuming this works, if the group breakout groups don't work, this is the first time I'm doing this in a Zoom event, then we'll use chat. But let's assume this will work. And when you go into your group, it should be about around 5 to 6 people. Please introduce yourselves to each other. Share your name, your institution, title, pronouns if you like. Share an example of a policy at your institution or how you might have applied one in your work, or what you're thinking about in doing that, how you might have applied it in teaching or in your research. For example, at Virginia Tech, one discussion we're having is that a lot of people have started using a lot of these tools, for quite a while. People who were on the early adopters edge. They've been using these tools, and now the policy is coming out. So there's some challenges to kind of adjust. Some people may have to adjust their practices based on the policies we have now. Sometimes you may not be able to access a tool within Virginia Tech's acceptable tool list or something like that. So love for you to bring up examples at your institution. Identify someone to be your group's reporter and note taker, and then have your discussion. And we'll come back and give at least 10 minutes so we can have at least a minute per group. So I'm gonna bring up the breakout rooms, and it's just going to automatically assign you. And I'll probably jump into rooms and just check in on how everyone's doing. And let's see, yeah, we'll do 7 breakout rooms, and you should get an invitation and just go ahead and join that room. I'll see you back in about 10 minutes. I'll send a reminder in the message. And Kimetha, Thomas, Carla, let me know if you see any issue with joining your room. I'm going to go ahead and broadcast a message to the rooms.
Ginny, I'll go ahead and stay in the lobby in case people pop back in and have questions.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I will go do that. Okay, I'm going to stop screen sharing in order to join the room.
People.
So thank you, Jason, for restarting the recording. Thank you all so much for participating in that. So now is a chance for groups to report back. And I think I'll actually stop sharing for a minute so we can kind of see each other more. And I'll just ask for each group, yeah, please share, a couple thoughts, and I'll keep an eye on time. So we'll take like 1 minute, 1 to 2 minutes per group. Maybe we'll go for 1.5. And yeah, group 1.
I actually want to say that I have to pop out because I'm moderating the next session, which starts at 2 Eastern. So have fun. Thank you, Ginny.
Thank you. Thank you so much for moderating. Okay, so yeah, group 1, what are a couple things you all talked about? And if there's something you
One
want
of
to
the central things we were discussing is just the lack of a definitive answer to a lot of these questions, and the comparative newness of all of this, the novelty, that's the word I'm looking for. How fast things are moving and how new a lot of these developments are. That as much as we may desire a sort of consistent framework for things, or an agreed upon consensus, that it's unlikely to happen, in the sense of this is new ground. No one knows the answers definitively. What would we base the consensus on? It's very up in the air. And then just from the perspective of all of us having a connection to health, the concerns re health information are going to be a big deal in our jobs, especially of getting people to realize that these systems are not safe from the perspective of HIPAA compliance or other national equivalents.
Thank you so much. Group 2.
Okay, so we were sort of split between academic librarians and public librarians. We lamented the lack of public library policies on AI, but don't necessarily have many suggestions, I think. We talked about how do you adjudicate violated policies. If you can't police something, how do you set a policy around it? And sort of settled on perhaps less policies and more sort of disclaimers as an option for public libraries, because we're not looking at it from the same like copyright perspective necessarily, not copyright, but that stuff is written by you and not something else that matters so much in schools, not plagiarizing and stuff. But disclaimers around, like, for instance, it uses a lot of energy, which can contribute negatively to climate change. And is that something that you should keep in mind when you're using this, and all the other ethical concerns that come up? And like Alex said, we did not have answers. Still to me.
Thank you so much. That's really interesting. I'm glad to hear some public library perspectives. Group 3.
Okay, this is Connie Phelps. We forgot to pick a person. So I'm trying to type in the notes what I remember, but maybe if somebody else who wants to share can share, somebody from the group. Or not. We had different points of view in our, we had archives, we had interlibrary loan, we had an embedded composition faculty member, we had a public librarian. A lot of our institutions are in the beginning of forming policies. One only had language in the academic dishonesty policy. Some people shared their policies. Some of them were much more fleshed out, like the Hawaii at Manoa policy looks very much fleshed out. And that's really all I have. So if somebody can do better than me, please.
You did a good job.
That's great. Thank you so much. I think we're on group 4. Is that right?
So one of the things that we discussed, I think many of us are like in the very beginning, so our institutions are at the beginning stages. And one that was interesting was like this conversation about lots of different units on campus are working on this, and like looking, like trying to figure out like what's that going to look like when IT and academics and the library, like everybody else, like all these different policies come together. And I think one of the other things that we were talking about in different ways is like, what does the policy do and what does that need to cover versus what does like the practical guidance? And, you know, you don't want the policy to be so specific that you're updating it all the time with the technology. So, you know, how do we balance like having a policy, but then also documents that people can use and can be updated more easily?
Great, thank you. Group 5.
I guess I'll speak up. I was the most talkative, which is a problem of mine. I would say that our group did largely speak of the lack of policies and the fact that many of us were in the process of developing policies, but still at the very beginning stages. I would agree with other comments here that it is a moving target and very difficult to sort of concretize. And I don't know, something, I hesitate, this was my contribution, but something that we spoke about was the coded bias in AI, how it is almost exclusively English, but trained on English language content. It is very narrowly time defined, maybe only 5 years worth of communication used to train it, right, from a very Western perspective and often skewed male. And so how to deal with that potential, that existent narrow viewpoint, right? Like when thinking about how to use it equitably. It's something we talked about a little bit.
Thank you. Group 6.
I'm happy to speak for group 6. For the most part, our institutions do not yet have a policy, with the exception of a the hospital, which does have a policy that is restrictive. And the hospital is even not allowing open source tools, which presents, problems for research and librarians. We had a mix of research institutions, community colleges. The libraries are starting to develop guidelines. Something that I had expressed was I'm really looking for guidelines on copyright and using AI to load in documents to summarize texts and what are the copyright restrictions and plagiarism. And it feels like licensing terms are trying to scare us into not doing that, but it's really unclear. And we need to go through some lawsuits and figure that out. And I also commented that, working at a research institution, the way I advise researchers is very different than, first year students. And I really liked the University of New Mexico's guidelines because they are user specific. There's a guideline for students, for faculty, for researchers. And I just briefly looked at the student guide, but I liked that it gave students very concrete advice. Like if they're accused of plagiarizing with AI, it showed them how to advocate for themselves and considered power imbalances between faculty and students. So I want to make a plug, go look at that. I am going to be sharing that with my team. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And 7? Unless I got the order wrong. You were 6, right, Bridget?
Yeah, no, you got
Okay,
7 right. I don't know if any of the other participants in our group want to speak up. So since I was the one taking the notes, I will be happy to speak up. So like so many of the other groups, our group had basically kind of come across the idea that there wasn't any institution-wide policies yet. There's a lot of task forces or committees or groups that are in the process of actually going ahead and discovering things, but not necessarily, having things set in stone just yet. Many of the policies or guidelines that are in the process are specific to very certain groups. Like, for example, not the library, but a specific school or, the writing center or something like that. The whole idea is that, how do you get students and other people to think critically about the material that they're ingesting online when so much of it can be AI generated? That's going to be a big part of the policies, is like, if you're going to use it, if you're going to assume that it's inevitable, that it's going to be used, how do we still make sure that they're being information literate, and that they're using it effectively if they're going to be making important decisions based on the output of an AI? And, right now we're still just exploring all of that, but I guess we probably can't take too long. Otherwise, we're going to get left behind and be left scrambling.
Thank you so much. Sorry about that. I will, if I find the right, oops. See. Try sharing again here. Okay. Well, thank you all so much. So I'm hopeful that you all added a good amount of that to your notes documents in the chat, but I also took some notes just now based on, what you all were saying. So I'll add that summary document in the folder as well. And you should all have access to that within the folder. And I just really appreciate you all joining and taking some time to dig into some of these policies. I feel like you brought out a lot of things from your institutions and also the policies that you took a look at that I hadn't, even additional things that I hadn't noted yet. So yeah, I feel like I've learned a lot, and I hope you all had a chance to hear different perspectives from people in different kinds of libraries or different roles. And yeah, I think that jumping in to presentations like this and getting started, understanding what's out there is the best way to not be caught off guard and be aware of how other people are thinking about it and share some best practices we find. So we're on a tight timeline with this conference. The second sessions are going to start in 2 minutes. So if you all want to head out, you're welcome to, and otherwise I'll hang out for a minute here in case anybody has anything they want to follow up about. But thank you again for joining. It was great to hear your discussions. I'm gonna stop the recording.